following the COVID-19 situation. I'm delighted to be on the core team of ITFA, which is chaired by Sharon Edwards, who is with us today and part of the agenda contributing to this session. I hope you can all hear me well. What I'm going to do is to basically mute you all so that we avoid background noises. Of course, you may unmute yourself in case of need, but let's avoid having background noises indeed. For those of you who were invited to this webinar on Discovering ITFA, we are a neutral association, a global trade finance association representing the rights and interests of mainly financial institutions and all those institutions supporting financial institutions like insurers, brokers, law firms, consultants. And recently, indeed, we have had many new members coming from the non-bank originators, institutional funders, asset managers, as well as technology providers. And as you can see from those categories of new members, you see how the market is evolving towards trade as an asset class, trade digitization, and far more technology being used. And that's why the membership has grown in those categories. The Fintech Committee, which Sean established and asked me to run about 3 years ago, is now including those 23 technology providers. You see them on the logos here. I won't go through them. We have a deck that is detailing all of those value propositions that we published about 6 months ago. In case of interest, it's available on the website of ITFA. Definitely, the COVID-19 has introduced quite challenging times for us on the trade finance side. And most importantly, during the first webinar we organized with Trade Finance Global, we got some key messages across in the industry, which we want to reinforce today. We talked about the transport challenge, the back office challenge, the legal challenge, and highlighted at a very high level how technology solutions could address. But today, we think we want to go deeper into the available technologies and how they can support facing some of those challenges. And as I said during that first webinar, having worked for the last 15 years on trade digitization and having faced a lot of challenges to grow adoption, I think now the industry has a unique opportunity to justify the investment required in digitization from a business continuity planning perspective, which is an additional driver for digitization. But often, as we will discuss today, policy decisions are also required to enable. So if you want to get access to that article that was published by S&P Global, San was, you can have access via the link. It's public on the website. Today, we have invited the following speakers in order to enrich the debate, to share the challenges they face and the solutions they are already working on, but also not only looking at what is happening today and in the next few weeks, but also what must happen in the next few months to foster digitization. So I will let them introduce themselves. You see their names on the slide here as they start speaking in the next few minutes. With this, I'd like to hand over to Sean, chair of ITFA and banker, and introduce us the focus of this session as well as the agenda on the next slide. I will navigate the slides for your ease, Sean. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, André, and thank you to all of you for dialing in, calling in, and videoing in for our third webinar related to COVID-19. So the DNA of ITFA has always been to come up with practical solutions. If you get that one slide, thank you, André. Has always been to come up with practical solutions to current problems, whilst at the same time working to change and create a better environment and better solutions for the future. André has mentioned policy changes, and I'll come on to that. But one of the things that's very important, one of the few silver linings of this global pandemic, is that it has become a catalyst for the increased use of technology in trade generally, but specifically in trade finance operations. and that involves a number of different things, from processing, from OCR reading of documents, to actually executing documents in the first place, and making that and integrating that into a very smooth, straight-through process. All of these different parts, I think we're all aware. We were joking beforehand how we've all become experts at using this webinar technology. So a crisis like this really does accentuate and accelerate the adoption. One of the things that we don't have to do now, and I speak here now as a banker rather than as chair of ITFA, is actually to sell our platforms, the technology platforms, such as, for example, Marco Polo, to our customers. So already, as Andre has said, BCP, business continuity planning, is extremely important now for everybody, to an extent that maybe it wasn't a few months ago. And so already we find a large part of the work that we have to do with clients done for us. But what are we offering them? What are the technology solutions, and are they available? I think for it to be a really powerful and holistic solution to all these problems, they have to be able to integrate a lot of different tools and deal with a lot of the problems we have. So, for example, KYC, AML, compliance, due diligence checking, and all of this stuff that we've grown to love and hate over the years, but which certainly is not going away. That is something that needs to be integrated and can be integrated into the platforms that we have. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of focus on electronic signatures, and that's not surprising, because people have needed to get deals that were already in the pipeline over the line and completed. But actually, when you think about it, digital signatures are only one part of the overall process. So clearly, there's a lot of help that digitization can provide for the back office. Generally speaking, this has been very manual, but what we found, and this is of course now that the pandemic is beginning to hit very hard in places like India, a lot of offshore processing centers are also being affected. So we need that technology as part of our operational resilience. What will it take for banks to adopt these technologies? Well, I think, as I said already, that there is a large part of the work has been done by the pandemic. It normally takes at least, I'm sure a lot of you will know this, it takes 6 months to a year or even longer sometimes just to make the business case. But if the business case is there now and is accepted by the users, what about the fintechs? I'm very pleased to have a couple of them here. They need to step up to the plate in a very big and very serious way. So it's an opportunity. It's also a challenge for them, and we'll hear from some of them who are providing some of the solutions later on today. I've mentioned policy changes. As many of you know, my day job is as a lawyer, and I follow a lot of the legal changes that need to happen. And as part of ITFA, and we'll talk about this later, as part of ITFA, we also lobby quite widely to change the law. Now, sometimes I'll take e-signatures as an example. There is sometimes only a very little that you need to do, but it's that last mile, that last link, that actually scuppers the whole thing. So if you have a port that won't accept digitized bills of lading, for example, that's it. The whole process falls apart. So at the end of this, we want, with your input, your comments, please use the chat facility. We want to create a call to action. How should we come together? What needs to change? With that, I'll pass back to Andre, and we'll start the agenda with looking at the challenges from the point of view of our customers, the corporates.
Thank you, Sean. Let's start first with the challenges from the corporate view and from the banker's view. We'll then look at the critical future policy changes that are required in order for more technology options to be relevant to address those issues. So with this, I'd like to hand over to Jari Hänninen, Head of Structured Finance at Nokia Corporation, to tell us his view from the corporate side. Jari, over to you.
Okay. Thanks, André, and hello to everybody. So my name is Jari Hänninen, and I've been actually heading the structured finance credit products in Nokia for over 20, or being actually employed by Nokia over 23 years, and will be actually leaving Nokia now in May. But thanks for having this opportunity to have this presentation regarding, in a way, how the corporates are considering the digital trade. I'm talking about digital trade here shortly, and then in a way there are references made to COVID situation as well. So what do we actually mean by digital trade? So somebody can actually consider it's some type of one-off document which is in a way digitized, and then we are starting to use that. I think that's definitely part of the process and the development, but also some people like myself possibly consider that we should consider end-to-end processes, whether we are talking about the guarantees or LCs, and who is doing what in different phases and in this process. So that is of course much wider perspective, but in order to make this happen, I think in a way we would need also to look into a little bit wider perspective and considering what are the parties that we need to cooperate with in order to make it happen. So from corporates' point of view, this is not related to Nokia as such, but how I have been discussing with several corporates, and I think, you know, what I have been actually putting here as corporate challenges apply also to banks. How to develop their trade finance processes and in a way trade flows and all what they are doing. So it's quite a fuzzy picture, and it's quite difficult actually to get grip on this in order to understand what the future may be and actually work towards that. In many corporates, so that the operations are very decentralized, ownerships are not necessarily very clear in multinational corporates, because there are so many parties who are participating in this in the process itself. So my suggestion is the more centralization you have, the better. End-to-end process understanding. If this is difficult for trade finance and in this trade finance world, so this is also difficult within the corporates, especially in the big ones. Utilization of trade finance service platform providers, and Nokia has been using actually quite long already these providers, and especially in this type of coronavirus situation. So I think in a way we are very lucky ones, because you can in a way efficiently actually follow up the trade flows and what is needed to be done, also from remote work. Business plan challenge. When you enter into business with different type of service providers, so it's actually quite difficult to make a business plan which is flying well from the beginning or after 2 years' time or something like that. I think in a way this may change actually going further. André was referring to this as well, that this virus situation may change our attitudes, and possibly we will actually get more support from the top management in the corporates regarding this type of development further. If you are in early adoption phase, whether you are a bank or a corporate, it's actually quite a risky and difficult situation. However, I would actually encourage all of you be more not too risk averse, but trying to do actually things in order to develop. Flexibility. This is an issue that Then when you are starting to enter into agreements with several service providers, so you need to consider, are you integrating actually their solutions into your ERPs, or are you creating some type of API solutions? How do you retain the flexibility in this world? My personal view is that when you are entering into this type of web-based solutions, you have more flexibility also for the future, and then you can, in a way, do the changes as things will develop further. Support from regulators and policyholders, this is a big issue, and I personally, I do not know whether corporates or the banks are supported sufficiently by these parties. I think in a way we need to speed up there in order to make this digital trade happen. And also in the process, of course, there are different, ITFA is a very good example of this. So we have been able as corporates also to say, and technology solution providers, and they are listening us, and together we need to cooperate in order to make things develop further. Support from banks. I think many corporates are considering that banks know all this stuff very well, and they can support you as things develop further. I'm afraid this is not the situation, and I think in a way the banks are also considering challenges. So once again, I would underline the cooperation. Let's consider these issues together, what makes sense and what can actually wait until further notice. And then in a way, not being too risk averse, but in a way trying and learning. And the next slide, thanks. Okay, then this current virus situation. So of course, on the corporate side, and I'm now referring, of course, to trade finance, and not let's say wider on the corporate side. How can we ensure, in a way, the continuation with the export LCs and guarantees? We need to be able to arrange guarantees in order to continue the business. We need to get, in a way, export LCs confirmed, discounted, and also documents presented. So if this situation is totally new, there have been some references made already regarding India and some difficulties there with the DHL and the likes. So this is having, of course, immediate impact to your cash flow. So this is very important issue. So bankers are not, I think, on Nokia side and in some of the corporates, I think, in a way, this remote work has been quite, let's say, usual every now and then. But on the banker side, this is a little bit different issue. I can say that I have been actually very happy with the bankers' attitudes and the attitude to support the corporates in this difficult situation. And of course, as mentioned, so if you are using this type of web-based solution providers and trade finance service platforms, so you can more easily adapt into this type of situation. How this coronavirus will then impact in the longer term? I think this definitely has been a wake-up call for all of us, and we need to do something. And these viruses are emerging every now and then, almost on a regular basis. So hopefully we are not getting anything similar soon, but the risk is there. We need to play safe also in that respect. Remote work culture implications when you are working from home several weeks, so you can see the implications. So I'm not sharing the camera with you at the moment, but you know what I mean, especially if you have children. Close cooperation is needed. I was underlining this already between different players in order to make this digital trade happen in the future. All the parties are needed. the regulators and ITFA banks, corporates, technology solution providers, you name it. I think both are needed to take place. We need organic development regarding different documents and templates to be digitized, electronic signatures and so on. But we also need some game-changing innovations in order to provide something which, because you cannot in a way necessarily change the manual work. I'm now referring, for instance, to letter of credit, let's say document checking and this type of solutions. So this from my side, and happy to comment if you have anything to.
Thank you, Jari. Let's hear now from the bankers, starting with John. What are the challenges that you face today? And then we'll follow on with Vinod and Samuel. John, over to you. John, can you hear us? Or can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, I apologize.
It's okay.
It was a great presentation up to there, my speaking. Anyway, look, there's a statement in the U.S. that you never want to waste a good crisis. And it's amazing how COVID-19 has really highlighted, just massive shortfalls in how we as an industry and even Citi as a bank handles trade finance and our trade business, right? Citi believes that we're a very innovative bank. We've been using imaging for decades. We deploy OCR, etc. But what became really amazing in this pandemic is the fact that we had so many shortfalls. The first is our entire business is still, even after all this innovation, our business is still very, very FTE driven, right? We still have large amounts of staff located around the world. Some of our operations are outsourced to third-party providers who did not really have remote access to our systems. We also had, problems with bandwidth and trying to get everyone remote. And some of our systems worked extremely well. Some of them worked really, really poorly. So that was a huge issue. The other issue that we had was, we still, even in today's world, really rely on wet signatures for many of the transactions we do. Our clients are now, working from home remote. They don't have the ability. So one of the things that, we've been able to innovate relatively quickly is our ability to take digital signatures. But it was extremely expensive getting legal opinions in various jurisdictions, etc. The other thing that I think it really kind of highlighted for us was the lack of governance and rules. We had a variety of clients declare a force majeure. Unfortunately, the legal framework on a force majeure usually requires a government to call a force majeure. Very few governments actually called one. So now we're in legal conversations with a variety of clients saying, you don't have the ability to call that kind of clause, and exactly what do we do? We also had the problem with the ICC, right? The ICC really has guidelines as to what you can do with documents if they're not presented or if they are presented in a certain period of time. But again, the question is, there's a force majeure clause, but there's no guidelines as to who can actually call that force majeure. So there's been a variety of issues. We've also had the challenges that many of you have, that when we've gone to clients and talked to them about digitization and e-documents, there really wasn't much take up. Many clients said, oh, that's very interesting, but I don't want a single bank solution, or we're not really ready for that, etc. So I do think we're in a very, very unique position. One of the things that we're doing at Citi is we're going back and looking at all the fintechs like Traydstream and others and saying, okay, so how do we deploy this technology in our business to make our operations, operationally scalable, so that we don't have to have all these human beings, that it becomes a much, much more straight through process. And I think, there's going to be a lot of innovation that's going to happen, but I think the innovation has to happen not only with the fintechs, but also around the regulatory infrastructure, how we handle things like this in the past. So it's been, a very interesting eye-opener for us. One of the things that I think we're really concerned about now, and again, this is somewhat US-centric, but there's conversations that COVID-19 may come back again in the fall. So it looks like we've hit our apex and are starting to come down. But if this comes back again in 6 months or whatever, which these viruses typically do, will we be in a better position then than where we are now? So that's really the goal that we're striving for. So with that, I'll stop and turn it to my colleagues.
Thank you, John. Let's hear from Vinod, indeed.
Hi. Thanks, Andre. Thanks, John. I think John's pretty much covered the whole thing. I would think of it in two themes. Impact on the corporate clients and kind of, let's say, the FI clients in terms of what's happening in some of the markets. Nigeria comes to mind. The second theme being impact on people. In terms of corporates, clearly an unprecedented amount of need for working capital financing, driven by extending cash conversion cycles. We see that happening all around the footprint, all the markets in Africa. The operational aspects of engagement have changed. John's already touched upon that. DHL, for example, in South Africa, the DHL official position is that they will only ship medicines, which leads to everything that kind of John spoke to about how do we take electronic signatures and so on and so forth. We have activated, shall I say, BCP. But that's a nice thing. I mean, that's a nice segue to move to people, the impact on people. Our corporate clients, number of markets in Africa are in lockdown, which means different things to different people. But what it typically means is the corporate normal way of working is not allowed. A typical way, especially as you go further down the chain, move into SME or mid-market clients, it becomes even more difficult, where a face conversation is almost always important. We have activated BCP, which then comes with its own problems. Most importantly, there are a lot of our staff members who are actually coming into work carrying the risk of contracting the virus. It brings a totally different angle to the whole situation. I think as banks, this is something that has been covered, but I personally feel very strongly about is that, and completely to John's observation around never leaving a crisis go to waste. This is a great opportunity and almost a moral obligation for us in the banking industry to start knocking the doors of the regulators. 2 days back, ICC came out with a potential way of approaching regulators, which is basically to ask them to say, please waive all legal requirements for paper documents. I mean, if we as the banking industry don't have that conversation with the regulators in our markets, I think we're almost doing injustice there. My take is that in all these situations, the arrow is pointing towards what all of us would agree to, which is digitizing trade. We have to find a way where in a market, the key banks get together and say that we will aim to kind of fully digitize. And for a change now, both the clients and the regulators would actually be willing to walk the extra mile with us. I think I'll pause there and back to you, Andre.
Thank you, Vinod. Let's indeed move on to Samuel of Standard Chartered. Over to you, Samuel.
Andre, thank you, Andre, and hi, everyone. So look, I think John and Vinod have covered quite a few points on the slide. To my mind, there are three themes, and I'll only talk about the first one today, given the topic. But broadly, the impact that we are seeing is around the operational items, which I think John alluded to, liquidity and the stress on that liquidity, and The third one, which actually worries me the most, is a credit risk element, and you'll only see that at the tail end of this virus impact going into Q3 and maybe beyond. And I'm starting to see some big signs of that. And you may hear some news in the media, especially with oil names, from Singapore, etc. Now let's focus on the operational side. Now talking about operational, and which is where the digital angle comes in. I think both John and Vinod touched on this. We tend to look at it let's look at it in two parts, right? The way our clients connect to us, and then how we as a bank then connect to counterparty, which is other banks and maybe non-client counterparties. In the first bucket, there has been such a sudden demand, clients that we have been trying to get onto our proprietary internet banking or similar platforms are now looking for the same solution and talking to us, and not just talking to us, they're signing up on these solutions, which was slow burn earlier. So clearly there's an increased demand, and more than a demand, there's an increased willingness on when it comes to corporate clients signing up to multiple digital channels, including the bank's own proprietary platform. A second is a more complicated area where banks are dealing with other counterparties, and typically involves transfer of title documents and original title documents, which is typically paper. Now, there is the technology there. I think most of the banks and the corporates involved have dabbled with everything from OCR to NLP to APIs to blockchain, and any of the banks on this forum and even corporates would be part of many of these pilots, POCs, even live platforms and consortiums. I think the point that John was making is very, very crucial. I think the lack of standards, and I know ICC is working on that with the IMDA here in Singapore, for example, to come up with URDT, or Uniform Rules for Digital Trade. And the UNCITRAL model law that was published years ago, I think that needs to translate into something that becomes universal. I think the real challenge we have is not the lack of technology, but how do we get all these digital islands to talk to each other? Because there's only so many us banks or even our corporate clients will be able to join. So it takes me back to 1973 when banks used to settle interbank payments via telex, and then 273 banks came together, and SWIFT was born, and MT 100 was born. We need to get to that equivalent in the digital paradigm today about how we're gonna do title transfers and electronic documents flowing seamlessly, albeit they may be on different platforms because the technology to exist. So let me just pause there. Obviously, with the lockdown, everybody is working from home. Our clients are working from home, and we have had to improvise and be creative about how they connect to us, depending on the market, and how we deal with other banks in situations where I think to Vinod's earlier point, couriers wouldn't pick up documents, etc. And there are ways around that, but these are operationally intensive ways as well. So we need to come up with a common language, because the technology will adapt once the language is established. And so to my mind, one key theme is the legal framework and the standards that need to evolve to make this adoption possible. Let me just stop there, and then we can come back if there are more questions.
Thank you, Samuel. So thank you to the three of you. We'll come back to you for more insights, of course. Let's first indeed look